Obi-Wan Kenobi's two forbidden loves show why he was the wrong master for Anakin. Each of Obi-Wan Kenobi's forbidden loves proved why he was the wrong Jedi Master to train the young, lost, and impressionable Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan Kenobi has always been one of the Jedi Order's most dedicated members. He believes utterly in the power and will of the Force and wants to serve it as best he can. He does so through the Jedi Order, obeying their rules and laws, and by training Anakin through the Order's most turbulent time. That doesn't mean Obi-Wan never questioned his devotion to the Jedi or the Force. Like many, he struggled with romantic feelings, one of the biggest discussion points among Jedi Order members and real-world Star Wars fans. What does it mean to fall in love? Is love the same as attachment? Though Obi-Wan experienced two near romances in his lifetime, he never truly answered those questions, and that's partly why his and Anakin's mentorship ultimately failed, and the now-defunct Star Wars Legends continuity. A young Obi-Wan falls in love with a fellow Padawan, Siri Tachi. Together with their masters, they endured many dangerous missions, and even worked so well together. They were sent on missions on their own, without the help of their mentors. After several years of friendship, during a death-defying adventure, Obi-Wan and Siri confessed that they loved one another. They eventually agreed not to act on their feelings because of the potential risks, and their friendship gradually faded. That story may no longer be viewed as canon, but it reveals plenty about Obi-Wan as a character. After all, the expanded universe stories were influenced by the same source material. Though Siri's story was originally confined to Legends, her character has slowly become part of Star Wars canon continuity. And the short story, There Is Always Another, by Mackenzie Lean. From a certain point of view, The Empire Strikes Back, Obi-Wan remembers wanting to hold Siri's hand while eating a meal together. There's also mention of her in the canon novel Padawan by Kirsten White, which features an Obi-Wan even younger than the one seen in Claudia Gray's Master and Apprentice. In White's book, Obi-Wan suspects that Siri would have been open to a physical and romantic relationship with him if he'd expressed a similar desire. So, why did Obi-Wan never act on those feelings, or even at least explore the possibility of more with Siri? His devotion to the Force and the Council prevented him from doing so. He feared that even as simple an act as holding her hand would mean he deserved to be punished by the Jedi's leaders, who had, over the years, sadly begun to fear attachments and love to a more disturbing degree. He was terrified of retribution and the idea of being ousted by the Jedi, and believed romance was utterly forbidden. Obi-Wan Kenobi's second love has been explored in slightly more depth, with the legendary Duchess of Mandalore, Satine Kryze, making her debut in Star Wars: The Clone Wars Season 2. Though we get to see much more of Obi-Wan's dynamic with Satine than we ever have, or likely will, of Obi-Wan's relationship with Siri, there are striking parallels between these two romantically tinged relationships. And the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan tells Satine that, had she asked, he would have left the Jedi Order to be with her. Satine responds that that's precisely why she didn't ask him to, but this exchange provides insight into Obi-Wan's mind. Obi-Wan has always believed that becoming involved with someone romantically would force him to choose between the Jedi and his partner. Though that may, to some extent, have been true during the prequel era, we now know without a shadow of a doubt that other celebrated Jedi Masters had fulfilling romantic relationships and were not ostracized because of them. And the High Republic era, set a few centuries before the Skywalker saga, Jedi Masters Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann discuss their romantic relationship with Grand Master Yoda. Rather than fearing what that means for them as Force wielders and being driven by that fear, they approach their love and what it means to love with respect and forethought. High Republic architect Charles Soule explained during an interview with Screen Rant that love and attachment aren't the same, even though the Jedi of the prequel era and Obi-Wan, in particular, certainly viewed them that way. Elzar and Avar aren't the only Jedi to have enjoyed a happy, healthy relationship without fear of succumbing to the darkness and possessiveness. Order 66 survivor Kanan Jarrus, for instance, had a loving relationship with Hera Syndulla in Star Wars Rebels without ever forsaking his duty as a Jedi or his connection with the light. In all other respects, Obi-Wan was rational and level-headed, and it's a tragedy that he couldn't see beyond his fear-fueled hang-ups and picture what his life could have been. There's been much debate about whether Obi-Wan was the right master for Anakin Skywalker. Many believe that, had Qui-Gon Jinn lived, Anakin might never have fallen prey to Palpatine's manipulations and resisted the lure of the dark side. Nevertheless, Obi-Wan and Anakin were thrust together, and through many dangerous adventures, they became more than Padawan and Master. They became family, of course. Anakin's biggest weakness as a Jedi was his ever-present need for love and affection. Having grown up with his mother, he'd learned to become attached to those closest to him and found it hard to distance himself from anyone who helped him grow and become who he was always meant to be. This included the Jedi Order as a whole. There's an interesting quote in Skywalker's A Family at War by Kristen Baver, which argues that Anakin was torn in two during the Clone Wars, caught between his disillusionment with the Jedi Order, caused by their role in the war, and his need to hide his relationship with his wife, Padme Amidala, and his loyalty to the people who saved him from a life of slavery and gave him the power to defend himself and those he loves. Leaving the Jedi wasn't an option, nor could he end his marriage to Padme. Would Anakin have needed to struggle with this dilemma if he'd been trained by someone other than Obi-Wan? Someone with fewer reservations and hang-ups about the consequences of love and attachment. Obi-Wan warns Anakin early on in Star Wars, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, that his budding feelings for Padme are dangerous. But imagine how things could have turned out if Obi-Wan had taken the time to listen to what Anakin was feeling, rather than immediately repressing it. Imagine if the Jedi of Anakin's time had been as open and trusting as those of the High Republic era. Obi-Wan projected his insecurities onto Anakin. Obi-Wan should have recognized that Anakin needed love more than he did. Instead, he forced Anakin to feel the need to keep his relationship a secret, creating further distrust between Anakin and the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan sadly didn't change his mind about love and relationships until it was too late. The novel Star Wars Brotherhood by Mike Chin reveals that Obi-Wan knew about Anakin and Padme's illicit romance soon after their wedding in Attack of the Clones. Rather than speaking to Anakin about it or informing the Council, Obi-Wan instead decided to keep that knowledge to himself because he truly wanted Anakin to have the happiness he didn't. Obi-Wan finally recognized that Jedi should be allowed to explore romantic relationships without fear of repercussions, yet part of him still believed, and perhaps rightfully so, that other Jedi wouldn't willingly agree with his new point of view. He kept Anakin's secret, fearful of what might happen to his friends and their newfound bliss. But what if he had spoken to Anakin? What if he'd explained why he'd always feared falling in love? If Anakin had someone to share his worries with, perhaps the young Jedi wouldn't have become so singularly possessive of Padme. Maybe he wouldn't have felt solely responsible for her safety. Maybe he wouldn't have felt like he was forced to choose between his wife and his duty. Obi-Wan Kenobi was a great Jedi, but his fears played a major role in the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker.